Today's video is sponsored by GadgetDiscoveryClub.com. Stay tuned for an exclusive offer. The Exorcist seems like a very easy movie to rip off. All you need is a girl possessed by a demon and a priest, and there you go. And look, this film redefined horror for an entire era, so it's not a surprise that it had a bunch of knockoffs. And oh my god, are there? Like, the ones on this video amount to just a single split pea in an entire can of soup. So you can expect a sequel to this at some point. But the ones I have here are some of the more glaring examples, as well as some of my favorites. So it's an excellent day for an exorcism, don't you think? Or a reasonable approximation. Number 10. Our first entry here is also one of the older ones on here, and it's from 1974, 1 year after the Friedkin film, and it's Abby. It's got Blackula as a teacher with a class full of students, and you can probably get from this intro alone that this is essentially the blaxploitation version of The Exorcist. Dr. Williams here is teaching about an ancient deity named Ishu, who was known as a trickster and an agent of chaos. And there's a dig in which they uncover an artifact, because of course there is, and they seem to unleash some sort of force. Meanwhile, the doc's son and his wife are moving into a new house because moving is the greatest terror, and almost immediately weird stuff starts going on. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but there's a trend lately where there's scenes with women in the kitchen cutting up food, and then they just start slicing into their hands. It was in the Grudge remake or whatever that was, and in Color Out of Space, but this may be the OG. Soon, Abby's talking in a deep voice and spewing obscenities, some word for word from Reagan's mouth, so of course they put her through medical tests, and of course they can't find anything. So eventually Dr. Williams, also a pastor, tries to purge the spirit from within her. This has the slightly unique aspect of a possessed Abby going out to bars and picking up men to take their souls, and eventually it leads to a traditional exorcism. And yeah, the plot points are similar enough that Warner Brothers was like, nope. Abby managed to get released and played in theaters, earning around $4 million, but the brothers sued, claiming it violated their copyright, and won, and the film was pulled from screens. Partially because of this, also due to rights issues, copies of the film are still a bit hard to come by, especially in a nice quality, and people are still awaiting a high-resolution version. The film's director, William Girdler, who also made Grizzly and Day of the Animals, acknowledged the film's ripoff status, saying that they definitely made the film to ride the shirt tails of The Exorcist and never got to see any of the profits that this one made, as the lawsuit with Warner was settled in '78, and Girdler died soon after in a helicopter crash. Number 9. This next one is definitely in the ripoff category, since it's 1975's The Return of the Exorcist, which kicks off with a very familiar sight: a possessed person strapped to a bed. It has Franco Garofalo, who you may recognize as being from Hell of the Living Dead, as a cult leader, and we have Peter, who is definitely possessed, with his sister telling his story through flashbacks. Turns out that while on a trip, he saw a nude woman at a waterfall beckoning to him, finding a medallion, and starts seeing her around and acting strange, and Peter's hair is sort of mullet-esque. When people around him start to die off, he realizes that he's connected, since he has visions of their deaths, and the red-headed woman, who is difficult to show you since she's buck-naked for the majority of the time. In fact, most of the characters in this film are nude for a good deal of it, mostly because the director, Franco Lacascio, moonlit as an X-rated film director under the name Luca Damiano. He's not credited though, as the director is listed as Ilo Panaccio, another adult film vet, and weirdly, even though you're gonna see that Warner Brothers got litigious quite a bit back then, as noted with Abby, and we'll talk about more later on. They didn't come after this one. Even though when they put it out on video in some countries, they called it Exorcist 3 Cries and Shadows. That's a weird title because when the film first came out, there was no Exorcist 2. So if this really was a part of the series, it'd more likely be the second one. But I'm not sure that anyone was really checking. It's honestly not all that similar to The Exorcist in terms of plot until around the 1 hour mark, when they put him through medical tests to try to figure out what's wrong with him, then find no issues, but then throws in some good old-fashioned incest, and yep, floating bed tied to the posts, and they call in an exorcist. Here, played by Richard Conte of the Godfather fame, and this would go on to be his last role, as he would die shortly before the film was released. And hey, 2 movies now about exorcisms that I've ended to recap with telling you about someone that was involved that died shortly afterwards. Ooh, scary. Number 8. So those were some old school entries, but let's go more modern now and check out one from 2022. And it's pretty obvious from the title what we're going for, since it's Exorcist Vengeance. As this one opens, you might be doing a double take. Didn't I say that this was from 2022? Didn't Charles Bronson die back in 2003? Yep, and I'll get to that in a bit, but then we have an old woman kill herself and transfer a dark force into another. Nicola Wright is here, so you know it's a low-budget English production, and then there's this cop, and I can guarantee you that this much cleavage is not standard uniform. And it's pretty clear that there's some demon activity going on, like when they're formally introduced to rule-breaking priest Father Joseph, played by Robert Bronzi. And let's talk about him. Robert Bronzi is a Hungarian man who bears a strong resemblance to the man himself, Charlie Bronson, and lived in Spain for a while. There, he worked as a Charles Bronson impersonator doing events and parties, and was discovered by director Rene Perez, who cast him in several movies, including one called Death Kiss, an obvious take on doing a version of Death Wish. The resemblance was noticeable enough that other directors cast him in their movies, like we see here as he tries to exorcise the evil spirits taking over Grandma. And here's another funny tidbit. A while back, I did a Conjuring ripoff video and talked about Scott Jeffrey and said the rest of his filmography read like a list of knockoffs. But yeah, this is one of them. But he had a co-director here with Rebecca Matthews, who fits the bill as well, since she did a movie called Pet Graveyard, and I think you can guess what that's knocking off. A Bad Nun movie, and The Witches of Amityville Academy, so she also knows her way around a mockbuster. And this does what you'd expect, although perhaps a bit sooner, since Joseph has Gran strapped to the bed and starting his ritual a half hour in. His methods are unusual, shooting at the demon and just sort of causing drama, although very slowly, since things kind of drag on a bit here. Number 7. This next one switches things up a bit, since it's not so much ripping off the plot of The Exorcist in the most direct way, and it's 1988's Witchery. It kicks off with a pregnant woman being chased out of a window, and then we have Little Reagan herself, Linda Blair. The OG Nick Fury is also here as a photographer, helping his girlfriend write a book on this old hotel on the beach, and meanwhile, Jane is seeing weird things.
What on earth possessed you to want to buy this place?
Get it? Oh, and Jane's mom might not look familiar here, but she's Annie Ross, Vera from Superman 3. And can we talk about how scarring that seeing her transformed into a robot was? I know that wasn't just me. There's a subplot here where Leslie is a virgin, and I swear that every scene is just Gary pressuring her into having sex, and they see some weird phenomena around the hotel, and there's this mysterious woman in black lurking around, an ex-movie star who's a witch and now has a sinister plan. People start getting killed off, or whatever is happening here, as the lady in black works her plan with 4 elements: greed, lust, a pregnant woman, and the defiling of a virgin. And some people might actually call this an Evil Dead ripoff, and that's because in Italy, that film was released as La Casa, and Evil Dead 2 was called La Casa 2. After that, they decided to release a completely unrelated film called Ghost House as La Casa 3, even though it's clearly not a part of the Evil Dead franchise. But this film was created to be La Casa 4 and was released as such overseas. Here, of course, it's just called Witchery, and it was directed by Fabrizio Laurenti, and it was his first film. So, not a lot of that sounds very Exorcist-y, right? Well, let's say you're a director, and you're making a movie, and you have Linda Blair in it. What do? This! In fact, this imagery of a possessed Linda was used in a ton of marketing, so it's pretty clear that they were really going for people connecting the two movies. Number 6. We're getting a bit goofier now with a more comedic take, since we're checking out 1991's Teenage Exorcist, which begins with a pretty great title track theme song. Teenage Exorcist, Teenage Exorcist. We then have one of the holy trinity of 80s scream queens looking for housing, and she meets up with Pluto and rents the place. And oh, it's also where Sorority House Massacre 2 and Evil Tunes take place. And holy crap, she pays Herman $50 for the first month's rent. And this place is giant. I don't care how haunted that is. I will take that right now. Diane is starting as a student teacher, and weird stuff happening, like milk shenanigans and blood lettuce, and a guy named Jeff that is stalking her. And when you're alone in a big house and spooked out, what's the logical thing to do? Play a Ouija board by yourself. Although thankfully, Captain Howdy doesn't answer. That night, she has some nightmares, so she calls her sister to come over along with her husband, a commissioner from Vice Academy. But when they get there, Diane doesn't quite seem herself. When she gets violent, they have to knock her out, and you guessed it, tie her to the bedposts, which just means that they followed step 1 in the essential book, How to Deal with a Demon-Possessed Loved One. The next step, of course, is to call in the Exorcist, which they then do. And he arrives in the form of Count Yorga. But you may ask yourself, isn't this supposed to be Teenage Exorcist? This guy is no teenager, and in fact, none of these people are teenagers. Hell, Brink was nearing 40, not that you can tell. It's clearly doing a spoof thing.
Your mother giant sacks in hell.
And it was directed by Grant Austin Waldman, who had done some producing but not a lot of directing. But it was written by Fred Olen Ray and Brink herself. But then, here's where the teenage part comes in. They call in backup, and instead of dialing the church, they accidentally call a pizza place, and they send Eddie freaking Deason playing that one character that he can play. And it sort of shifts into a bit goofier of a comedy here, and there's demons and creatures, and it shifts away from the Exorcist formula a touch, and it's entertaining enough. I mean, it's not great, but it seems to be pretty poorly reviewed. It's kind of fun, but I'd like to point out Eddie Deason is still not a teenager. Speaking of ripoffs, there's a lot of them out there, so it's nice to know that there's a way to get cool and original stuff without getting ripped off. And if you have a hankering for awesome gadgets, this Gadget Discovery Club subscription box service is a way to exercise that. Each box contains a theme and a variety of useful goodies, and every single time you get one, it's like a little mini birthday present. Like in this box, I got this wireless charger that's sleek and efficient. It's pretty handy when I'm going to bed at like 2 in the morning and really addled from watching Camp Blood 11 or something. And it's pretty easy to just pop my phone down on this and not worry about anything. Wake up to a full charge. It was just one of 4 items in the box. And it was also this cool grip for my phone, which is pretty helpful for filming and holding it while shooting in front of Horace Pinker's house. It's a pretty simple service since you can choose from a variety of options from quarterly to annual, and even choose multiple boxes, with each one having a value of at least $125 inside and containing 1 to 4 different gadgets. Some of the themes listed are travel, everyday carry, audio, even nutrition, and everything can be handled online, so you can cancel at any time, skip some boxes, or switch up your shipment dates. And here's the scoop. If you go right now to gadgetdiscoveryclub.com/movie timelines, you can get a great discount of $20 off of the quarterly plan, the annual plan, or any gift using the discount code Movie Timelines. Number 5. Back to ground zero for these movies, the mid-70s, and let's check one out that puts its aim right in the title, and it's Exorcism from 1975. Like, they ripped it off so much that they just changed one letter in the title. And this is also called Exorcismo, and is from Spain. It begins with a car crash due to some drunk driving, and Layla's boyfriend is apparently a bad influence, so her brother calls in a priest. And this is Spain, so they call in none other than Paul Nashi. But considering his name isn't Waldemar Daninsky, you can rest assured that he's not a werewolf in this one. Of course, after digging into her life a bit, Richard ends up dead, and since this is a movie about exorcists, it's required that his head be twisted around. As Layla starts to act weirder and weirder, her boyfriend also ends up with the whole peeking over your shoulder look, and after what feels like a very long time, Father Dunning finds out that Layla went to a certain ritual on her trip to Africa, and the director of this one was Juan Bosch, and this is probably one of his more known films, but he did a bunch in Spain. And he also co-wrote it, with Nashi pitching in as well, since he very rarely appeared in movies that he couldn't at least write his own dialogue. Apparently, the idea to make this one was his, and he claimed that he thought of it way before The Exorcist. In fact, in Spain, this movie was released first, but it's pretty clear that he had at least seen the American film, considering some of the similarities between the two. Like this almost Karras and Kinderman dynamic that they have going on. And then, of course, Layla has wounds that mysteriously appear, and a messed up face spouting out obscenities. There's definitely a switch up when it comes to who's doing the possessing, but then they toss originality at the door with some mouth goo, and it's not until the last couple of minutes that we get full-on Exorcist level stuff, and it's pretty clear that it's still a knockoff. Number 4. Let's go back to those early days again and check out another one from 1974, prime post-Exorcist era, and it's The Antichrist. With that title, you may be inclined to wonder if it's instead a ripoff of The Omen, but it came out first. We meet Hippolyta and her father, played by the great Mel Ferrer, and she's paraplegic since the age of 12, and she starts encountering some unusual phenomenon, and her father is a fancy-pants aristocrat, while her uncle is a cardinal at the Vatican. When she tells him about her visions, he sets her up with a parapsychologist who soon sees that she has ESP. He puts her into a hypnotic trance, where she sees an ancestor who was burned at the stake. Her dad is getting remarried, which Hippolyta is pretty upset about, but then, of course, because it's on this list, she ends up being possessed by the spirit of her ancestor, who made a sex pact with the devil. She ends up twisting this guy's head around, because head twists are mandatory, and she does the usual, throwing out sexual comments at dinner parties, like you'd expect, and of course, mouth foam. I'm not sure why it's just become a standard that people are like, oh, you're possessed, you're gonna have some goo in your mouth. Other regulars include the old levitation, and by the finale, it's all the regular Exorcist knockoff stuff, and it was directed by Alberto Di Martino, the guy who gave us The Puma Man. And it's crazy to me that there was no litigation with this one, considering how happy that Warner Brothers were with some of the other flicks. This is probably one of the most similar in terms of some of the stagings of scenes that you're gonna get without being an outright parody, and even throws in some pea souping for good measures. Number 3. I know that you're out there saying you've done Italy and Spain, but everyone is just dying to know if there's a Turkish exorcist, and the answer is hell yes, and it's Satan from 1974, not fake bacon. And you may ask yourself, how close of a ripoff is this? And how about it starts with Tubular Bells? And here's the thing, most of these other entries are just like, well, we're going to steal a couple of key scenes from The Exorcist, but not Turkish Exorcist. Nope, They were just like, we're gonna take it all. And this is nearly a shot-for-shot remake. I mean, check out the Pazuzu statue in the desert. A discussion of the possibility of rats in the attic. Everything. Our version of Reagan looks pretty similar to Linda Blair, and some of the elements are altered based on cultural distinctions, like the whole Christianity aspect is obviously toned down, and their version of Karras is a writer, not a priest. And the Ouija board is different. But of course, the real silly starts when the possessions begin. So you get low-budget recreations of the bed shaking and a hilarious version of the head twist. And then look at the drama of the first time they face off. Like the sheer amount of drama involved. And yeah, obviously this never really got a wide release in the US because of the copyright issues, although it can be found now on DVD and streaming. But the quality is pretty crap. But you've got everything you're looking for, just a sweeted version of it. And holy moly, is it pretty fun to watch. I mean, you're just watching The Exorcist, but one that deletes a good chunk of the religious aspects and also a good chunk of the budget. And I mean, seriously, look at this head twist and the appearance of the statue in the finale, and you tell me that you don't want to watch this right now. Magic. Number 2. Well, here's the one that you're probably waiting for, because we're going to talk about the 1990 comedy spoof, Repossessed. It begins with a version of the ending of the original film, just sillier.
Put down that crucifix.
Oh, I love it.
The priest is Lieutenant Frank Drebin, and he's playing Jebediah May I. Get it? Father May I. And that's the peak comedy in the film. But it does have a pretty rockin' title track.
Don't wanna be repossessed. Repossessed.
And it's then 17 years later, and May I is lecturing a class, and Melissa Moore is here. And you know, every single time that she pops up in a movie, I refer to her as the girl from that scene in Repossessed. So this is now the first official time that I'm using this scene in context.
Young lady, would you pull down your dress?
Sure.
So, Reagan is named Nancy here, and I'm assuming that's intentional, as she's married in the suburbs with a couple of kids.
And split pea soup.
And yep, that's Linda Blair herself, returning to the idea of being a demon-possessed girl. And the mayor of Otisburg is here as well, and he's a TV evangelist, and through his show, Nancy is, say it with me now, repossessed. And then the guy who's not George Clooney from Return of the Killer Tomatoes is here, and before long, things are looking very, very familiar. And Blair was actually really happy to do this role, considering that the filming of The Exorcist was extremely exhausting and traumatizing, so having a shot of goofing it up appealed to her.
Father Brophy, meet Father May I.
I never thought that looked like me. Does that look like me?
And I really wonder if that joke was a product of the effect. Like, did they get the head and they were like, this doesn't look enough like Leslie Nielsen? And then we're like, should we make another one? And someone else was like, no, that costs money, so let's make it a gag. And I know that I like to be the one that says it's in the title, but I'll let them do it themselves here.
I think Nancy has been repossessed.
Repossessed.
And you know, I have this on a list of Exorcist ripoffs, and there's no doubt that it is one. I mean, a spoof. But oddly enough, when it came to the marketing, they went with a sort of different kind of ripoff. And it's got a cameo by Body by Jake, and if this nerdy guy in the classroom is familiar, then you watch Sex in the City, but I won't tell anyone, it's okay. But if you squint really hard, you'll catch pre-implant Julie Strain in her very first film role ever in the background. It was both written and directed by Bob Logan, who did a fair amount of writing, but not much directing. But he did a comedy film in '89 that also featured Linda Blair, and then a strange flick called How to Get Revenge, also with Blair, so it's clear that the two worked well together, although this appears to be their last project together, and is pretty well remembered, even if it's, well, extremely hit or miss. But it's still pretty fun to watch, even if your eyes might end up sore from all that rolling. But it's nice to see Linda Blair having so much fun, and Nielsen's always a treat to watch, and it ends in a bit of a silly musical number. Yeah, I like it, but I also don't know if it's recommending is a good idea because it's pretty crap, but also kind of awesome, but also not. Number 1. Let's close this up with my personal favorite ripoff, and it's 1974's Beyond the Door, the rippest of the ripoffs. And this one has a wild story. It begins with a voiceover from the devil himself, and then has a really weird imagery of, I guess, a possessed naked woman with a man's face and a car crash. And then we meet Jessica and her 2 kids, and one of her kids is reading Love Story, probably not a book for a 10-year-old kid, and the other is literally drinking a can of soup with a straw, which is the most horrific thing on this list. Her husband is a swanky music exec.
What's the matter with you guys? Sounds like a jerk-off session in the bathroom. If you could play your instruments as well as you play with your tools, it might sound a bit better.
Good thing the white guy with the porn stash is there to teach the all-black soul band how to play music. But hold up, the little girl doesn't just have 1 copy of Love Story. She has a dozen. And little Ken litters his soup can with a woohoo! And they're just missing an Italian guy dressed up as a native shedding a tear. Jessica reveals that she's pregnant, and holy crap, there's more soup here! Jessica starts to exhibit strange behavior, smashing their fish tank, and yeah, I'm telling you, I get that they put the constant pea soup in the film, going as so far as to have the kid have a literal poster of it up on his wall, like it was a joke or some sort of tribute to The Exorcist. But what the hell is with the Love Story copies? And get this, as Jessica's possession gets worse, one of the signs that she's turning evil is that she sees a banana peel on the ground and picks it up and eats it, which I less think means that she's possessed and more means that she's freaking gross. And the whole beginning of this film is pretty non-ripoffy and mostly does its own thing. It doesn't even really seem like it's about possession at times. But that all changes once Mommy's head spins around because, duh. And Ovidio Assanides directed this one, and he knows his way around a knockoff since he later directed Tentacles, a Jaws ripoff, and rather famously fired James Cameron from Piranha 2. And this one was also the subject of a lawsuit from Warner Brothers for being so similar to The Exorcist. They filed in 1975, although the suit dragged on until 1979, when Warner Brothers won and received a chunk of cash, as well as a share of any future revenues. And the film was pretty profitable, considering they made it for $350K, and it made over $15 million. It made enough money that they released 2 other films that had nothing to do with this one as follow-ups, but both were Italian films with other titles that were simply marketed as Beyond the Doors 2 and 3 here in the US. But after all that, where's the rip-off stuff? Because this eyeball gag is no rip, and it's pretty awesome, and a little funny. But then she starts speaking in a deeper voice. Her skin starts to flake. She starts hurling obscenities with wonky contacts, spitting out pea soup. And of course, when things get nuts and the kids have to go somewhere else, they pack the damn soup and the books. It's literally the only thing they show them packing. So it's all they need. And then, of course, an older man comes in to help them deal with the demon, and things start getting out of hand. But first, nose flute solo.
No one will help you. I know you're sad.
Quite a bit of the finale feels a lot like a carbon copy of The Exorcist, although not as close as, say, Satan or anything. but you can definitely see the reason for the lawsuit. But it's still one hell of a good time. So there you have it, 10 Exorcist ripoffs. Some of the more blatant ones. There's lots more out there. I will cover plenty more in the future. Let me know which of those you want to see. My list is like yay long of things to cover in the future. But comment down below, see if there's one that I don't already have listed to do in the future. But I thought most of these were fun. There's only like one or two in this list that I would be like, I would not be excited to watch again. But most of these are worth watching. There's some really fun treats in here and good times. So check them out if you haven't. Let me know which one of these looks interesting to you. Let me know how many of these you've seen. Let me know some other Exorcist ripoffs that you would like to see me feature. All that down below in the comments. I want to see it. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like. If you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it by hitting the subscribe button. If you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/movietimelines. I'd appreciate that. You can support me like these guys do. I thank you very much for that, and keep on coming back and watching more videos. Thanks a lot. See ya. Bye-bye.